Okay, so a short series of videos today. Let's start out first talking about the brain. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the McLean model of brain. And what happens is your brain sits like this in the side of your head. So you have your brain stem, your limbic system, and your cortex. Specifically, right here, here's your prefrontal cortex. The curious part about that is that's the part where the I in I really exists. The part of me that gets to plan, the part of me that's free. Um, and the other part of it is, if you notice which finger this is, it's very specifically the one that you use to fuck yourself, in the sense that you think too much, you don't live, you don't feel, you don't experience. So, all that being said, what we're going to talk about today are the three different motivational systems. Now, the one that we most commonly think about is the flight, fight, or freeze. And essentially what happens in that is our brain sitting in here, information comes in our eyes, into our brain stem, and then it moves up. Ideally, the front of the brain and the limbic system are wired together. This happens throughout our adolescence, and this is what allows us to handle heavily weighted emotional content in a way that's kind of balanced. What happens is, in a very stressful situation, like if we see a snake or we're in a car accident, the information comes in, goes to our brain stem, and what happens is our brain essentially pops. So if you notice, just from a very simple, almost like a linear type of way of looking, information comes in, it gets here, then it moves. And where does it reach first? It gets to here before it gets to here, simply because it's a shorter distance. And what has to happen is, for this to have control, right, they have to be wired together. Now, a way to think about neural wiring is the way that you can almost think about paths in the forest. So if you go and walk through a forest that has not been walked through before, you'll notice it's overgrown. But you'll also notice, if you continue to walk through that path over and over and over again, that the path will actually get deeper and wider. Now, what you're doing through adolescence is you're wiring these different parts of your brain together in a way that allows you to be more functional. This is where your coping skills are. The problem is, most of the coping skills we learn happen essentially by accident. Your parents teach you these. You didn't choose them. They function well in the world that your parents live in. So, as you go through your adolescence, you have to relearn different skills to make this work. So, the first motivational system, fight or flight, is essentially around keeping us safe, motivated towards safety. So this predominantly exists in the limbic system, and it works through cortisol and adrenaline. And so what we know is that when our body and our brain thinks we're in danger, it's going to give us lots of cortisol and adrenaline. Cortisol for lower level things, adrenaline for higher one. If you struggle with chronic stress and lots of ongoing anxiety, you're probably feeling lots of cortisol. So the superpower of the front of your brain, right here, it allows you to organize your time in such a way that it can manage your limbic system here, so that way it's not overwhelmed by cortisol and adrenaline. Now, the second one is the dopaminergic system. This is the one that causes drug addicts and anyone with an addiction lots of trouble. This is the excitement neurotransmitter, and it's also the one that gives us a sense of reward for accomplishing something. Now, when you think about what it means to be human, the animal part of us, the things that would make sense to give us dopamine are things like food and shelter and sex. But what actually happens is all sorts of other things get tied up. Accomplishments, our ego, different things that we're just hoping for. And we realize that dopamine comes often with just the anticipation of being rewarded, the anticipation of an outcome. So, all that being said, I'm going to come with a second video here momentarily and talk about behavioral interventions and behavioral reinforcement and how to make that work for you. The last system is the tend and befriend. The tend and befriend is one that's often stereotypically associated with women. It is the most relational of the three systems. It is basically oriented around oxytocin, which we call the cuddle hormone, And it's one where we actually experience greater meaning and joy through the connection. So, if you have issues feeling lonely and meaningless, often it's because we over prioritize fight or flight, which is keeping us safe, and dopamine, which is keeping life exciting, over connection.